The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
The writer is good at paying attention, I believe, to the world around him. The good writer practices that. But I do also believe that there's a danger in being too self-preoccupied. And I think the beauty in writing is to hold it loosely, is to not try so hard. All good pieces of writing and literature, for me, always come off effortless.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Sean Dietrich is a blogger, a storyteller, a musician, a novelist, a columnist. On his blog, Sean of the South, he posts a new story every day about the people and places of the American South. His new book, You Are My Sunshine, tells the story of a long bike ride he took with his wife. In this episode, Sean and I talk about paying attention, talking to strangers, and the unconventional path that took him to his work as a writer. Sean Dietrich, thank you so much for being on the Habit Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sean of the South, so that's your blog,
Yeah.
Sean of the South, which is every day you post an essay on there?
Yeah, it's been every day for about 10 years now.
And these are tight little essays, what, 500, 800 words?
Yeah, when I started, I would never go over 460 words. That was a personal number for me that just came out of the blue. And so I kept every essay for a good couple years under 460. I think maybe a few times I got to 462, and that's as high as I go. Then I gave myself some freedom. I got to 500, and now I linger around 600 to 800 words. And so I've been at the 600 to 800 range for the last 6 or 8 years, somewhere like that.
Yes. Talk to me about how you manage to write an essay every day.
Well, I heard an interview with a young man who was a newspaper reporter, and that was the industry I'd always wanted to get into, was newspaper, because the artist, who's the literary artist, has some sort of luxury built into their professional, at least their idealized professional workspace, and they get to ruminate on things. They get to write when the muse hits, write when the inspiration hits. But the newspaper man is a workhorse. He has to accomplish the daily miracle every day, and I liked that. And I heard an interview with a young reporter, who had gotten to interview a famous baseball coach. And the baseball coach and him were talking, and they were getting into this conversation, and they realized that they had talked and done this interview right through the national anthem. And the young reporter was so just embarrassed by this. He said to the coach, old coach, "I'm so sorry. I can't believe I talked to you through the national anthem. How disrespectful." And he looked at the kid and he said, "Son, I do this every day." And I remember thinking, doing something every day frees you up. A lot of people might think it locks you in and it's hard, but really it gives you freedom because you know you're going to approach it again tomorrow. It gives you freedom to get it wrong. So that's how I started it. I started it as an exercise, as a practice, and then it took over my life.
Yeah. At some point, you reach a point where you realize there's always more where the last came from.
Yeah.
And I think you have to push through to a point. It's easy to think of creativity as some sort of reservoir that might go dry if you don't steward it or be careful. But the truth is that I imagine you have discovered that the more you do it, the more it flows, the more it happens.
Yeah. To me, it's writing is more akin to practicing the piano or practicing the guitar or practicing an instrument than it is to creating a painting every time you paint. You sit down and you work through the basics. If you're an instrumentalist, you work through these basics of your craft, scales, arpeggios, small passages of songs, etudes. When you're writing any form, long form, short form, you're allowing yourself the freedom to work through a study. And you learn, rather than treating it like a creativity that has to be good, it has to be perfect. This is a practice, like martial arts or some other kind of. So that's how I view writing. I don't, I've written a lot of columns now over the last decade, and maybe one or two of them are any good. It doesn't matter to me anymore whether they are good or not. They are, and I enjoyed the process of writing them.
Yeah.
So that's
well. I've seen you joke, in your blog, you joke about talking a lot, talking too much. You said in your report, every report card says Sean talks too much.
Yeah.
But I think what's impressive and it's not your volubility that's impressive. It's the fact that you're paying attention. Right, every day you're paying attention to something enough to write a well-formed essay about it.
Well, I appreciate that. That might be where the idea for the blog itself started. I had gone through a really terrible time personally, just a perfect storm of catastrophic events, and I really didn't have a center or a focus in my life, and I had tried to enroll in a writing program at a very well-known university, which shall remain nameless, but is located at 1600 FSU Parkway, Tallahassee.
Okay.
And I was turned down. I was turned down because I'm a high school dropout. I'm a middle school dropout, if you want to get technical about it. And I approached education much later on in my life. Uh-huh. I went to community college, got on my equivalency. So I didn't belong there in their opinion. Uh-huh. And truthfully, I probably didn't belong there. But after you get turned down, it hurts. It hurts because this was a field I wanted to go into, and I thought that I had been shut off. My license to do what I really wanted to do was denied. So I had tried to get in on a few newspapers to start writing, and they asked me for some sample work. So I gave them some sample newspaper column style format pieces. And at many of the meetings that I had with the editors, they would take my piece and they would read it and they'd say, "I can't do anything with this. Huh. This is too in the moment. This is too regional. This is too uplifting. This is too goody, warmy, happy, smarmy feeling. We need blood, we need guts, get out there and find a real story." And that's just not me.
Yeah.
So I just did what I did, and I put it out there on the online format, and the rest for me was, that's the only winning horse I've ever been riding.
It's great to live in an era when you can kind of make your own genre, so to speak. I mean, your newspaper people may have been right. Maybe they can't do what you do. So,
but I still believe that there was an audience for it.
Yep.
And I believed that. So I didn't want to put myself in the moment of a dark moment. I'm getting around to answering your question.
Okay.
Like you said, I do talk a lot.
Yeah, I forgot what the question is.
Well, it's a practice of studying everyday moments and everyday people.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to do that.
Yeah.
That's why the writing is born out of my attempt to do it. I haven't figured it out. I just I try.
How did you get from middle school dropout to now I think I'll go to a creative writing program in college? There's a gap there.
Well, I started writing when I was in 5th grade. My mother gave me a typewriter. Mm-hmm. I loved to write fiction. That was my true love, and I was a really big reader. Tolkien, I loved to read. Mm-hmm. Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, fantasy, and then I read classics and stuff. I just love to read, and so I crafted these little stories of my own. They were not any good, but then when I dropped out in middle school, I dropped out in 7th grade after my father committed suicide, and it wasn't really that big of a deal around my people. Mm-hmm. Education was important, I guess, to some degree, but not like it is to many other groups of people. So nobody said anything. I got a job. I started working. And once you get into the workforce, you realize there's really not a whole lot of room for creativity here. And it changed my mind real quick. I wanted to do something creative. So when I did enroll in college, what I wanted to do first and foremost was write. I wanted to do something that was fun. And so one of the very first class I took when they allowed me into school was not a remedial class. It was a creative writing class. And I was the first kid. I think I was 20 years old. I say kid. I was the first guy in the classroom. And no one had even showed up yet. And she said, well, why are you so early? And I said, well, I've waited a long time to be here. And so that was one of the teachers who gave me one of the best one-word advice, one sentence advice axioms that I've ever had. And that was, I like how you talk. Just write how you talk. And we'll clean it up a little bit. And that'll be your voice. And it just was so revolutionary. She wasn't criticizing me. She wasn't telling me to go here, do this, or to make sure I do this or follow this format. She just said, write how you talk. And it freed me up. Yeah. And it was the best advice I've ever had. I remind myself of this every day when I write, to just write this.
Yeah.
This is easy. If I just had to write a dialogue of what we're talking about today, I could do that.
Yeah.
If I had to really think about something to write about, and make sure that it was good and important and it mattered to people, I couldn't do it.
I'm glad to hear that you got that kind of advice in an academic setting, right?
Yeah.
Because academic setting is often, let's figure out some other voice besides this one that you grew up with.
Yeah.
To talk some other way.
Well, sometimes the academic setting it can suffocate good creativity, I've found in my short experience, but this was not that way. But then again, this was a really small community college. We met in double wide trailers, and it was just a different kind of people. All our instructors knew our first name and how our mama was doing, that kind of thing.
Have you kept up with that teacher?
She's passed now, but I did, yeah. I found her after I had my first book published. I saw her by chance in a grocery store, and she asked what I did. And I was able to tell her what I did, and it was an extraordinary moment for me.
That's
and I
great.
think she liked it too.
I bet it was for her too. Yeah. Sean, I'm sure you've heard the saying, there's only two kinds of stories: a stranger comes to town, or a person takes a trip.
Yeah.
And it seems like a lot of what you do is you taking a trip.
Yeah.
You seeing something new, writing about it.
Yeah.
Not too long ago, you'd read something about Noonan, Georgia, and it got passed around social media.
Yeah.
And my mother-in-law's from Noonan, Georgia, and so there were people in my world that were excited about what you had done, And of course, your new book, You Are My Sunshine, is about a bike trip.
Yeah.
I just want to talk about this idea of getting out of what seems normal and seeing something new, and how that shapes your work.
Yeah, well, because I grew up rural, because I spent my formative years in the Florida Panhandle, and it was just, it was flat. We had one kind of tree, a longleaf pine, and that's about it. We had the bay, that was it. There wasn't a whole lot of travel in my life at all. So I've never been overseas. There's so much of America I've still yet to see.
You've still not been overseas?
Oh, never have. Never have. I think we went on a Carnival cruise to Mexico once, if that counts. But I'll be honest, I don't remember most of it. But I had friends who would travel, and they had been overseas to Europe, or they had been, to different places. And part of me was always envious. And then I finally got to a stage of my life where I was able to have wheels and do my own thing. And I took some of my first road trips, just me and my old truck, and I realized that this is where creativity and writing comes from. Seeing new things. Because when I write about them, I process them in a different way than I would process them just looking at them. Now I get to take out a magnifying glass and look at them. So travel is so important to me, and I'm making up for lost time at this stage of my life, trying to see as much as I can. And it is. I sometimes tell Jamie, I can't seem to write unless I get out and travel and move around. It doesn't have to be anywhere exotic. It can be to, Charleston or Somerville, or it can be to some backwoods Tennessee town. It doesn't matter. Let me see some people. Let me eat at the local Greasy Spoon. Let me do something local that only the locals know about, and then let me write about it.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to do. And I'm doing it for myself most of all. But so I think it's imperative for the stimulation of the mind of the writer to get out and move and see and touch and taste. I think if you're not doing that, you're not living, for one thing. Therefore, you might not have a whole lot to write about.
Yeah. You say you're doing it for yourself, but it seems to be obvious to me that you're also doing it for Somerville and Noonan, Georgia, and Thomasville, Georgia. I love that piece about the big tree in Thomasville, Georgia.
Oh man, I love small towns, and I love towns. And I guess what I'm really trying to say is I love people. Like Noonan, those people were so good to me. Those people, I did a thing at their book festival just recently, and I got to speak in the old courtroom, and these people were they just rolled it out for me, rolled out the red carpet, so kind.
Yeah.
And the way I grew up so shut off from people. No education, being the child of a suicide, being a suicide victim, I guess if you want to call it me. You're blackballed by a lot of people. They don't know how to deal with it, so they don't. So you grow up feeling isolated, and then isolation becomes your defense mechanism, whatever. And at this stage, I've rediscovered human beings. And part of that is in little towns across the Southeast. And I have felt such a connection with my fellow man through what we do now, that my life has so much more color, so much more meaning than it ever had before for me.
Yeah. One thing I think that your work does is, when you live in a small town, you think there's not much to this.
Yeah.
Right? And when you go write about Noonan, Georgia, Thomasville, Georgia, some town in East Tennessee, you're honoring them and giving them a new way of seeing themselves.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's one of my main goals. To me, small town America is, I know they say it's dying, and I'm sure it is, but it's also like the hidden gem in this country that yes, the populations are going down, but they're still there, and they're still just as wonderful as they always have been. The heart is still there. The soul is still there. They still know everything about and I want to see that, and I want to touch it, and I want to feel it, and I want to honor that, because to me that is America.
Yeah.
I come to a big city and I feel lost in the fray, but when I go to a smaller place, I don't know. I'm attracted to it. I want to honor it, celebrate it.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, another sort of part of your mojo is your willingness to talk to strangers.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's my mother coming out in me. We couldn't take a bus trip or go out into the Piggly Wiggly without my mother meeting somebody and having an hour-long conversation in the parking lot until I had starved to death, you know. And I have definitely inherited that from my mother. I can talk to anybody. My wife and I went out for our anniversary one year, and we sat at the bar waiting for a table. And a guy next to me at the bar had this really great story. And my wife kind of looked at me and looked at the guy and thought, our anniversary's over. He's going to talk to this guy and get all the details. And we did. Me and the guy talked for a long time. And I'm not sure if I ever did pull away. And we might have had to redo our anniversary dinner. But I do love to talk to strangers.
Yeah. You got any more to say about that, talking to strangers?
Yeah, talking to strangers is a skill. It's not, I mean, I've inherited it, but it is a skill. I have another friend, he's a therapist, and he's just the most social, happy guy. And whenever we go out into public, he can make friends in any situation with people. Whereas I'm looking at these individuals around us, and they're guarded, they're tight. This is just kind of the normal American way to be now. Just kind of keeps to yourself, private. And he kind of busts through that. He's an older guy, and he's able to bust through that. And I practice this myself. And when you're able to do that, you'd be amazed at the new scope you get for life itself. I mean, I was at a bar last week, and there was this guy who came into the bar, and he was loud. He was speaking so loud, and he was when he would speak, spittle would come flying off his mouth. And he was young, and his fashion was very strange, very angular. He was wearing these big baggy jeans. He had, tattoos, and everybody was cutting him dirty looks at the bar. Like there was something really wrong with him. Perhaps there was something mentally wrong with him. And I sit next to him, so I kind of scooted next to him, and we started to talk. And come to find out, he had a traumatic brain injury about 10 years ago, and the doctors said he was dead, except for one doctor who said, I know we can find a specialist in Europe who can deal with this kind of head injury. So in order to get that specialist, they froze this young man in ice at UAB.
Wait, they froze the whole
his whole body. They put him into an induced frozen coma. It's one of the only times that it's been done in the USA. They got this doctor in. This doctor did some crazy magical surgery on him that he installed pump devices inside his body that deliver medication so that he doesn't have to take medication orally, which would screw up different organs and make him loopy. In short, this man's life is a miracle. And he is a beautiful human being. He is a miracle. So what he does now is he teaches art to inner city kids in Birmingham. And yes, he still suffers with the after effects of his TBI, his traumatic brain injury, but he is teaching these children while he's alive, and he's going out, and he even adopted a daughter. He's a beautiful young man, and I would never know that had I not ventured past the line that we often draw to make a new friend. Yeah, and now we're friends.
Do you have questions, tried and true questions that you ask strangers to start a conversation?
No, I just talk. We just talk. and maybe 5 minutes through, I might think, I'd like to write about this person. Yeah. But at that point, I never direct the conversation. I just hang out and listen. And when I'm done, if I feel like this was good, I'll approach writing about it. And if not, I'll leave it alone.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I've never written about this man, but I would like to, but there's some moments that you have that are so incredibly special. I think I don't want to write about that. I don't need to share this with other people. This was just for me.
Yeah.
Which again, I just shared it with everybody.
All
your thousands of listeners.
And the listeners to have it. Yeah. So one thing you pointed out, somebody had written to you for writing advice or something, and you pointed out that writing starts with paying attention and examining, what comes into our view, which is, I think that's great writing advice, somewhat standard writing advice, but then you took the next step and said, now the problem is, because writers are interested in examining things, they end up examining themselves. And
did I say that? That's
yeah, true. I mean, but basically, the gift of the writer is to pay attention and examine the world, but the danger there is this sort of excessive
preoccupation,
consciousness, whatever. Now you seem to have forgotten that you said that, so maybe you may not be ready to talk about it.
No, I do remember saying paying attention, and I do remember talking about the self-examining. There is danger when writing. Sometimes when I write, I will write for 8 hours a day. Sometimes, most of the time actually, unless we're on the road. Then I write in the passenger seat when my wife drives. That's a lot of time spent in your head, and you do that repetitively. You're with yourself. You are keeping yourself company. Your words are also the return end of your conversation that you're having with this screen, with this keyboard. And the writer is good at paying attention, I believe, to the world around him. The good writer practices that. But I do also believe that there's a danger in being too self-preoccupied. Sometimes when I go to like a book festival or something, I'll meet authors, and these are authors who are doing much better than I am in their world. Sure. And yet when you talk to them, they are very preoccupied with themselves. Yeah. And I'm not sure that writing doesn't make that a little worse for them, because the pressure gets greater when you start, your output gets bigger, and when people are more interested in it. And then you're putting this pressure on yourself. So now you're really thinking and examining what you're going through and how you're feeling. And these people have nervous breakdowns sometimes. And I'm thinking of one writer in particular now who the pressure just got too great. And I think the beauty in writing is to hold it loosely, is to not try so hard. All good pieces of writing and literature for me always come off effortless. The feeling is always effortless. The reading of it feels effortless, and you just get the feeling that this was easy for this person. And that feeling doesn't come across, and at least in my work, if I am totally focused on me. Yeah. It has to be, I'm out here having fun. I'm looking at the world. I'm looking at things. Yeah,
you're looking out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's my opinion now. And remember, I'm uneducated, know nothing. So these are thoughts and little things I've come up with.
You say, you're uneducated. And I'm not clear on exactly how much education you ended up getting. But I do remember, I dug up a favorite quote of mine from Flannery O'Connor and kind of wrote it in my notes here. She says, the type of mind that can understand good fiction, and of course you're writing nonfiction, so let's just say good stories, is not necessarily the educated mind, but it is at all times the kind of mind that is willing to have its sense of mystery deepened by contact with mystery. I'm sorry, its sense of mystery deepened by contact with reality, and its sense of reality deepened by contact with mystery.
That's interesting. That's a good one. That's a good.
The type of mind that's willing to have its sense of mystery deepened by contact with reality, and its sense of reality deepened by its contact with mystery.
That's good.
Isn't that good?
Yeah, that's real good. And she's one of my favorites too.
I should hope so.
Yeah, she beautiful. I mean, I just went to Savannah and kind of hung out at her house.
You went to her birthplace?
Just to touch it. Yeah.
Did you take the tour?
I didn't take the tour. I've taken
tour.
it before.
Yeah, it's a great tour.
Yeah, that's a good thing. I write fiction, so I have my fiction side is there. And I just submitted the final or the first manuscript for my next novel. And I would say writing fiction and nonfiction for me is still the same. You know, a lot of people, I've listened to a lot of authors and things that I've done, and they're experts, and they say, well, it's different. It's when you're writing nonfiction, you're this, you're that. When you're writing fiction, it's this. It's to me, it's the same. Fiction focuses on the story and the arc and the entertainment. And when you read a nonfiction book, it has got to have a story. And it has got to have some nugget of entertainment, or there is no reason to read it. Fiction explores things through the cloak of anonymity, and nonfiction, people are afraid sometimes to explore those things, so they just don't. But the reader wants those things explored too. So I don't see any difference in fiction and nonfiction.
One thing I love about nonfiction is that you're forced as the writer to keep looking at what's there until you understand what it means.
True.
And with fiction, you're tempted to kind of fudge things a little bit so that you get to the meaning a little more easily.
Well, I agree with that. I would say in fiction, you are making the thread that goes through the series of vignettes, whereas in nonfiction, you have to look for the thread.
You're given the thread.
Yeah.
Good luck figuring it out.
Yeah, because you've got 7,000 threads. You know, every day you have 10 or 12 different stories operating, and so you're telling all these, but you have to figure out which one is the most important. And so by the end, like my last nonfiction book, when I finished it, I read. I'm a pretty hard editor on myself. Before I ever submit, I try to get it really good. When I went through it the first time, I thought, "What in the world did I just do? What was I trying to say? This makes absolutely no sense. This could be the worst drivel I've ever written in my life." And I had to really ruminate on that and think and find my main main thread, and go back and then go back and go back, and it took a while.
Yeah. And that tells the story of a long, long bike ride, 300 or 400 miles with your wife?
Yes. We went 350 miles from Pittsburgh all the way to Virginia. And I rode a tricycle. So I looked like and it's interesting when people see you riding a tricycle out on this fitness.
You're talking about like the recumbent bike thing?
That's it. You remember big wheels?
Yeah.
It's kind of like a big wheel.
Yeah, right.
For adults.
Yeah.
It's interesting, people's reactions to you when they're on the trail. They would look at my wife. She's riding a traditional 2-wheel bicycle, and then they look at me, and I'd hear them as they kind of drove on past me. They go, "He's so brave for being out here." And here I am pedaling, thinking, "Wow, I've really sunk to a new low." And the really hard part about it was my wife with a traditional bicycle. One of her rotations equaled about 5 of mine. So she was pedaling down this road easy, and I'm like, the little Boston Terrier trying to keep up. Yeah, that was my book. And so it was the pandemic when that came out, and I remember...
Pandemic when you made the trip.
When I made the trip, that's right.
Books just coming out
Books
now.
coming out to yesterday, or day before. Yeah, yesterday. And I thought to myself, what am I going to write about? This pandemic, what am I going to write about? I mean, the whole world shut down. The pandemic began during the book tour of my last nonfiction book. And it was, we were like 21 cities, and we were on city like 9, and the world shut down. And that is not how you want to release a book.
Yeah.
But it is what it is.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, after that disaster, I've got this other nonfiction book I'm going to write, and I'm thinking, what am I going to write about? And it was a difficult time. So we had this experience that was extraordinarily transformative, going out and being in nature and getting your focal point realigned. It was so good for us. And I thought, I'm going to write about this. And once you do that, you have ruined the trip that you took.
Yeah.
You have ruined you because you are going to be examining and re-examining what you just went through for the next year, every single day.
Yeah.
And by the time this book is done, you will hate the bike trip. You will hate every word. I mean, it's...
Yeah. Were you writing in a notebook every night?
Yes.
Yeah.
I had like 3 big notebooks when I got home. And the reason I chose to make this my book was because I had written a series of columns, just a few, as soon as it was done. And these columns got a lot of attention from people because we were all suffering in the pandemic, closed inside. And it seemed to me that people all wanted to get out and do something.
Yeah.
And I took that as, so people would like to hear more about this. So
let me ask you a question about, you commented on that you're spent a year working and reworking. You know, when you go to a concert and you watch the whole thing through because you're taking pictures on your cell phone the whole time, that seems like a good way to miss the whole thing. You know, I'm at the Grand Canyon, I'm trying to get the right picture instead of looking at the Grand Canyon. How is the writing you're talking about, how's that different? Or is that another version of the same thing?
No, that's a great analogy, because that's a great analogy, at least in my mind, because about 8 years ago, I went to the Grand Canyon for 21 days by myself, and I was going to write and do stuff. And while I was there, I had a really nice camera with me, and I took about 2,317 pictures.
About 2,317?
Yeah.
It could have been 2,316.
But we're not sure. Yeah. So there I was when the trip was done. I had taken all these pictures, and I looked at my final count, and I thought, I've got it all documented. I've done it. And as I was driving out of a Cocosino or whatever the forest is, national forest, something happened to my camera. It fell, something in the back happened. I pulled over, went to go get it, and I looked at my camera, and everything was gone.
Really?
I had lost 21 days worth of stuff. So I had 2 days left in Arizona and a camera that didn't work. And I realized that I had missed the whole Grand Canyon because I was so obsessed with getting the right picture, so that I could recapture it later.
Yeah.
And I had really not seen it. So without the camera, I spent 2 days, and I realized I saw more in 2 days than I saw in 21 days. 20 or 19 days. At the canyon with that camera, that's writing for me. I meet a lot of journalists who they'll carry their notes, their notepads, and when they'll do an interview, they're scrupulously taking notes of everything somebody says. And they're probably doing the right thing with what modern wisdom says to do. I don't do that. I've never taken a notebook to an interview. When I interview somebody, especially if it's off the cuff, but if it's even formally set up, I listen, I pay attention, and I'm in the moment. I try to be. And when it's over, I don't do this just because I don't want to take a notebook. I find that I retain a lot more. Just being in the moment and not making sure that I'm divided. So yes, when it comes to writing, I feel that it's important to stay in the moment. You're going to get plenty of time to re-examine when you go back through it. But if you don't stay in that zone, you're going to take the picture, and you're not going to have anything in the memory to write from.
Yeah.
That was a really long answer to your simple question. I'm sorry.
So I got one last question before my actual last question.
Okay.
And that is, in a recent column or blog post, you said your life ambition is to help others who have fallen. And the context for that is you were talking about your own father who, as you said, died by suicide.
Yes.
He kind of fell and couldn't get up.
Yeah.
And you are interested in the ways that people fall and do get up or can get up, and empowering people to get up. So I'd love to hear you say a little more about that. I think you phrased it, this was my father's gift to me.
It was. He left us in a wake of, it was ground zero.
Yeah.
And there were no discernible gifts after that at all. And then somehow, maybe it was about 7 years after he passed, I began to see that I identified with different people than other people that I knew identified with. I would go into a social setting or a room, and I identified naturally with a different kind of person. I would naturally seek out, find, and befriend the person who really was on the skids. I don't know why, or I didn't know why. All of my closest friends, it occurred to me one day, all of my closest friends are all boys without fathers, or young women who are practically orphans, or they've got a disease, or they've got some really, really physical obstacle. A friend of mine had cerebral palsy. And why am I friends with these people? Why are these my chosen? It really, really got to me. And I realized that my father had, when they do a skin graft on somebody, the donor loses those layers of skin and exposes this raw piece of skin. And it's cliche, but when you go through a really bad experience, when you are around someone who's fallen that hard, when you see these horrible things happen, you lose this protective layer of skin, and you become very raw, very, very easily affected. And little touches hurt you more than they would hurt other people. And the adverse of that is also true. The little warmth moments, little reassurances feel much better to you than they do to other people. I feel
that's a great insight.
Well, we only have each other. And when you're around fallen people, you see this all the time in AA. You see it in all these support groups of anything. They lean on each other. Yeah. And I just want the reason of my life to be to help the people who have nobody to lean on, right? Through whatever little means I can. I'm only one guy. I can't do that much, and I'm really not that great of a person. I'm just kind of one guy. I do want to help those who have fallen and can't see the light, because I know what it is like. I continually fall in moments where I can't see the light, and I don't get out of those moments unless someone helps me out. You can't do it yourself. Yeah. And I'm not talking about just suicide. I'm talking about all sorts of areas. A lot of people go through medical crises and they don't know how to get out. People have helped me out, and I want to help other people out. And the fact that I can directly relate to my father. He accidentally instilled that in me through what we went through. Yeah, that was the gift. The gift was that he made me a better human being than maybe I would be. Yeah, yeah, or at least a more intentional one.
Yeah. All right. Well, last question: who are the writers who make you want to sit down and write?
That's easy. Louis Grizzard was my all-time hero for two reasons. He was short and brief. Yeah. And he was funny. But he could also touch your heart. Sure. So my second writer is really probably my first, and that's Mark Twain. Not because I'm a high-minded literary person, because I'm not, but because he went through so much garbage in his life. He went through death upon death upon death and failure upon failure, and still managed to keep a trademark sense of American humor that set the standard for humor writing, but also for the American novel, and so on and so forth. And the fact that he'd gone through so much heartache and managed to do that, to me, is the more impressive story than what even more impressive than his writing is itself.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, Shawn Dietrich, thank you so much for being here. I hope we can talk again soon.
Man, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com. And to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.